What is going on, GhostRobo Army? I am coming to you live from my car as I cover a good chunk of the United States, making the journey from Indiana to New York to visit my extra sick girlfriend by car. So I've got a lot of time on my hands, a lot of open road, and I thought, what better moment than now to start thinking about Game of the Year. One of my favorite things about the holiday season is Game of the Year lists and Game of the Year discussions. Compiling my top 10 has always been a super fun thing for me. Even before YouTube, even before I had anyone to share it with, I would still pinpoint my favorite games of that year because it's a great chance to look back at our video game memories, our favorite standouts, our big disappointments, the crappy ones, the letdowns, the awesome multiplayer times, everything in between, and then lowering it down to a final list and crowning a champion is something that I just get a huge kick out of. And I've always loved listening to others as well, podcasts and websites, and seeing what other people enjoyed over the past 12 months in gaming has been just a pure moment of bliss for me every year. So we're cruising along, and it's kind of interesting how you lose track of time and vision sometimes when you're making a trip like this. It's about a 6-hour drive, and I'll have moments where all of a sudden I'm 10 minutes further down the road and I don't remember seeing what the last 10 minutes looked like. And it's not because I'm distracted, it's just because you sort of fall into these lulls and your body goes on autopilot and you're functioning 100% fine, like I'm not crashing or swerving or nothing, but you just sort of forget the visual part of it, which I think is so weird because I'm a very focused and sort of like always go, go, go person, and so it doesn't happen in my daily life. But when I drive, like, you'll lose track of the visual space around you, and that just, it sort of freaks me out in a way that your brain can kind of just control things without you even consciously seeing them. Does that happen to you? Maybe it happens to some people in daily life. I could see it happening. If your body has the capability to do it driving, it surely could when you're typing or speaking or anything, I guess, sitting there playing video games. You just zone out and lose sort of that eye sense, and it's all in your head, like sort of daydreaming, I guess, while driving, which sounds incredibly dangerous, but I'm perfectly okay. And my trusty iPhone 6 here is able to store a lot of voice memos. So if the quality isn't grand, I apologize, but I wanted to get this little solo cast out there and share my thoughts and see what you guys are thinking about Game of the Year and how you felt about 2014 overall as well. So I don't have a list in front of me. I don't have a chronological order, so I'm just going to cover these in what I remember most. And I, with games and how you rank them, sometimes I think memorability should be one of the highest criteria for a gem of a video game, because you can look back and say, oh, that game was super great or that game was super competent, but it's the ones that leave their mark, I think, that you should personally then grade the highest. And I'll forget games over the course of the year, and I don't know if that's because they weren't good or because they just didn't strike me in a certain way, but I'm going to talk mostly about what I remember and kind of jump around to the highlights of 2014 for me. And before I even get to a specific title, I think that something that stood out to me this year more than anything was that this was a very down year when it came to memorable plots and memorable characters. There is not a single storyline that I really got invested in, a single main lead protagonist that I grabbed onto, even a villain that I really thought was super cool. But that's not to say there weren't great games. This was the first full year for Xbox One and PlayStation 4, and I expected huge things at the start. The launch lineups were okay, as you'll expect them to be for brand new consoles. Stuff like Rise and Dead Rising 3, stuff like Killzone Shadow of Fallen Act, they were okay. I enjoyed them in their own rights, but it was really in 2014 where we expected to get the true signs of next gen. And for me, I think that started off with Infamous Second Son. I think that's a March title, and it was one that I was just really excited for. It probably should have been Sony's flagship launch game for PS4, but alas, it came out a few months later, and it was gorgeous. I definitely had my next-gen moment in that game. Delsin gathers his abilities at the beginning of the game. He realizes he's different from everyone else, and he's chasing after his brother towards Seattle. And there's an instance where you walk through a tunnel, and for the first time you see the neon lights sort of radiating and almost in a fuzzy kind of just very damp way. There's a lot of moisture in this tunnel, and you can see Delsin's reflection, and the way the lights are kind of just shining very majestically, almost like a it reminded me of like a Christmas snowy night, except there's no snow, there's just moisture in this tunnel, and so the way that the pretty lights, the pinks and the oranges and the greens and the blues are all reflecting and just refracting and all that good stuff, it was glorious. And I had a beautiful moment where I screenshotted that and shared it with my family and friends and was like, dang, next gen has arrived. And I'm sure if you guys played Second Son, you probably felt that way as well at some point. And then there was the game, and I thought the game was just, I thought it was more than competent in every way. It's a really good game. There's not a single, like, lackluster element when you're playing. It feels really fluid to fly around, the different abilities. I thought they made traversal very effortless. You know, you've got some of those shortcuts with, like, the smoke vents, you can run up walls, sort of your arsenal of powers in the way that they affect movement. I give that an A+. I think that it does it better than something like Assassin's Creed Unity. You know, you're zipping around the city, and you never really come on any of those strange stumble moments. The combat is also pretty darn cool. You know, you're mixing in smoke and neon and some of the other abilities, which I still won't spoil in case a few of you have not played that or whatnot. But it's a fun game to do battle in, and I think they strike a nice balance of difficulty and overwhelm and different powers, and I kind of wish there were more powers, but it for me was a more fun fighting experience than the past Infamous games. So from these standpoints, I'm really high on it. Where it sort of all falls apart for me, and where I think it falls apart for most other people, because you don't even really hear it being spoken really that often about anymore, which is surprising for such a mega game when it launched, is that the story and the main missions really fall flat. They did some nice voice work. There's some decent interaction between Delsin and Reggie, his brother. There's some decent moments with a female villain. And there's, I guess, a sensitive moment and a few sensitive decisions with characters, some karma points as well that you can, you know, sort of be very dastardly or very heroic. But it doesn't really ever hit home. It kind of feels generic and flat, and I think part of it, the characters themselves, I don't know, I think they just kind of all rub me the wrong way. Delsin and Fetch and you know, the third power guy, the villain, they're not bad, but they just, I don't know, they just don't have that quality that would make them be forever cemented in my mind, like someone in the vein of Elizabeth or Joel and Ellie, or, you know, the characters from Half-Life, or, you know, so on and so forth. They don't have that. And so that game becomes more about just cruising around the city, taking down strongholds, and collecting all the different shards to max out your abilities than it does really making your way through a phenomenal storyline. And I still think it's a very good game. You know, when I played it, I would have rated it like an 8.5 or a 9. I think it's a fun game. You know, the actual in-hand experience, which is a big thing for me mechanically, delivered, but it doesn't have that shining star moment to really really earn like a game of the year spot for me. You know, it's probably on my top 10 list for sure, but I don't think it even climbs towards the top few because it just feels so good but not great. And I'm actually kind of surprised that people forgot about it so quickly. It's a pretty short game, and there's not a whole lot to do. And again, this is why I feel it should have been a launch title, and it probably was supposed to be, because in comparison to some of the other open-world titles like Watch Dogs, Sunset Overdrive, GTA 5, Next Gen, Assassin's Creed Unity, so on and so forth, it's pretty sparse in terms of its city. And the best moment in that game, besides that first, you know, glorious graphics reveal, is sort of climbing the Space Needle, and nothing ever really lives up to that beyond that moment. You never again have like a set piece that's really that spectacular, and so the game kind of falls by the wayside as a very fun game, but not one that I would grant any sort of Game of the Year nomination. If we take things in a totally different direction, let's talk about Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. This is a Wii U platformer that came out in February and was a whole lot of fun. It definitely delivered on sort of that Nintendo seal of excellence, which you're pretty much guaranteed with one of their flagship franchises, where you know you're going to get a great mechanical game. Like, it plays like a charm. It's perfect in that way. Presentation-wise, like from a visual standpoint, it looks great. It, you know, quick load times, everything that you could want functionally, again, is perfect. Of course, it does not have a storyline that's going to stand out, because Nintendo doesn't do that with Mario or DK or any of their mainline. Zelda a little bit more, but definitely not in DKC tropical freeze. Nonetheless, this was a super fun game. Like, I enjoyed the heck out of it. I played the entire time with my brother in co-op, which I think lessened the difficulty, because this is a pretty tough, hardcore platformer. It's not a kid's game, as everyone sort of wants to say. Sure, you've got the cutesy monkeys and their, spot-on fur tech, which looks fantastic, by the way, especially, mixing it with the snow and some of the cool environments that they threw in there. But it is a tough game. It's a tricky one, and I think I got a little bit lucky playing in co-op, because you could fall off the stage and still finish them, because my brother would just be, rolling along as I was trying to make it a difficult jump, and you have basically 2 lives going at the same time, so of course you're going to have a little more flexibility and a little bit more leniency in your perfection. But that was a super enjoyable and super fantastic game. I love minecart stages. I don't think I'll ever not like minecart stages. I played the original Donkey Kong Country games on SNES at a really sort of perfect time in my life. I was like, 8, 9, 10, in that range, and so that was sort of one of my defining games, playing Donkey Kong Country and Donkey Kong Country 2 with my dad, with my brother, by myself. I gained a lot of my gamer skills then and there, and even though some people look back on those games, and I constantly hear people say that they were not good, that they were just fun because of sort of some of the effects in the background and how they pushed the graphics chip, but man, I thought those games were just stellar. I really loved them. Recently played through the first Donkey Kong Country at a blast, and I always love 2 with the introduction of Dixie, one of my favorite Nintendo characters, who I wish was in Super Smash Brothers, a game we'll touch on later. But DKC, the new one, it's so recommendable. It's like a great game on Wii U. I think it's a super fun time, but it's a platforming romp, and it doesn't really, there's nothing I can pull out of it to say this is game of the year. And for me, that is just, that's a mandate. A game has to have that moment where I'm like, oh my god, or it sticks in my mind, or I talk about it all the time. Something that just defines it as a really standout experience. And Donkey Kong, while being a great game, again, that I would give like a 9 to, didn't have just that pure magic moment for me. I think it's a really fun game, but I don't know that it was trying to be a year definer. Rather, it was a great game within a genre that most companies have forgotten, and a game that I think was so underplayed and forgotten because of its release time. Go back and play that one. If you have a Wii U, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, it's brilliant. Also releasing around that time, one of the weirdest releases of the year to me, which is Titanfall, a game that I expected to do great things and ended up being $9.99 on Black Friday. What a whirlwind of weirdness for that one. It's hard to pinpoint where it went wrong, because I thought it was a really great shooter when I first played it. And some people would say that the beta weekend killed it, that so many people got their fill in that free few days that then they didn't end up buying the full version. Some people will attribute it to the fact that the game launched pretty feature incomplete with no true single player and just a very, very small set of modes and weapons and abilities. Some people will say that it just wasn't that great, that the idea of fast movement and wall running in Titans just was a bad idea, and some people will say that it just, I don't know what some people will say. Hopefully some people know the right answer, because I sure don't. I just find it strange. I really like Titanfall for how it added movement first. We had Destiny, we had Advanced Warfare, but Titanfall was out well before the others, and it definitely did it very, very, very good. I think that the movement in that game is super fun, and I loved my first few days with that game. It got weird because most people dropped off, and it's multiplayer only, and so without friends, where do you find yourself? Some strange choices were made in that one. People are what's called regenning, basically prestiging very quickly. And I think that they just sort of botched their marketing by trying to hide the fact that it didn't really have a single player. They kept saying it did. They kept trying to tout like it did, and basically single player was just playing multiplayer with a couple little voiceover bits, and those lobbies ended up being empty and hard to fill, and there were specific Titan rewards tied to that, so you couldn't even unlock certain chassis, and it just felt like a very botched effort all in all. The game itself, I really liked it, and I think most people did. It's almost like, I don't know, it just had some bad mojo or something, because maybe it's bad karma from the Infinity Ward guys. I don't even know, but weird. I think a couple things that I can definitely say for me that didn't work are, you do too well in every game by including the sort of the minions, the little NPC guys that you can kill to get points. The idea was to make it accessible for everyone. The idea was to make it so that anyone playing could be, a help to their team and be effective even if they couldn't take on a pilot opponent. There's no satisfaction really in killing those secondary enemies, and for me, even the Titans weren't the greatest to fight. I think the biggest joy is duking it out with another pilot and killing them. The problem becomes that these maps are expansive, there's a lot of NPCs, Titans are easy to come by, and so the pilot-on-pilot combat is at times few and far between. Also, no kill streaks, so you get your Titan, and sure, you can lower the time of the Titan, but how many times do you need to get the Titan before you sort of lose interest in getting the Titan? You know what I mean? There were times where I just wanted to stay on foot because I was having more fun doing that. And not to say the Titans played bad, but it's such a given that you're going to get a Titan that it feels like not much of an accomplishment. And because of the NPC characters, the little, minions or whatever you want to call them, creeps, padding your stats, you always do well, and yet you never feel like you did that well. I was scoring so high, and my kill-death ratio was so high, but I felt like it was almost cheating in a weird way because you were gaining so many kills from other sources. Now, that would be fine if there were some incentives to do really well, but again, the absence of a kill streak system, I think, really killed sort of the desire to do well. And because you're getting your Titan and you're getting the ultimate, what would be sort of a final kill streak in a game like Call of Duty, this big mech, I just think that their balance was off. Now, there was a mode, which was Titans on Titans, that I did really enjoy, and I think that might be the best mode of the game, but it's definitely not enough to carry a full $60, retail release. So they dug themselves into an interesting hole, and I'll be, very curious to see how they climb out of that for Titanfall 2. They've invested far too much in the universe and in the franchise to abandon it, but I think they sure have a lot of work to do. The DLCs came out with literally no fanfare. The game is $9.99 on Black Friday, and I don't think anyone cares. And that's sort of such a shocker because this was one that I would have expected to just sell gangbusters and continue to be a sort of classic in 2014 for the Xbox One, and it was their big hit to vault themselves above PlayStation, and it did not glom on in the general gaming populace in the way that they had hoped or predicted, and I think that was a huge hurt for Microsoft this year. Not to say that Sony had a standout title that really defined their year either, but they already had the lead, and they had sort of the mind share, the heart share of gamers, and Microsoft had catch-up work to do. And they made that by a price drop, and I think they're being really aggressive with the bundles this holiday season. Some great prices there, $330 on Black Friday and the Thanksgiving weekend for like the AC Unity bundle and stuff like that. That's awesome. Man, console wars are annoying, but it's interesting to see how Microsoft is responding, and then it'll be interesting to see if Sony responds to them, because right now neither console really has an exceptional lead exclusive. Master Chief Collection is a game I haven't even had a chance to play. I've heard it had so many problems with the multiplayer. I didn't really feel too driven to dive in early. But if you think about is there a must-have for either system, and I don't know that that's the case. The Last of Us Remastered seems like the best game exclusive to PlayStation 4, and that's one that you could also, and probably already have played on your PlayStation 3. The best game for the Xbox One this year, though, hands down, is Sunset Overdrive. I think that's a fantastic release, and I know we're bouncing way ahead chronologically, but I just want to touch on this game. I'm still currently playing it. I'm at the final mission. It's awesome. It does something different. It took chances, and it pays off in a big way. It's doing a colorful, creative, crazy game with a mature theme and a shooter set of mechanics, and it all comes together brilliantly. Adding in that movement, talk about effortless flow and infamous. Man, Sunset, you can just zoom around that city. Adding an air dash to your arsenal, you've got the grinds, fast travel as well if you're feeling real frisky and you don't want to waste any time, but the guns, the way it all works out, and it's something that I thought would get boring super quick, but it's one of those games where you're interested in challenging yourself to do better. The style meter up at the top right is constantly kind of taunting you to do a little better, be a little more creative, be a little more awesome, and I think that's pretty exceptional. It's fun to fight guys, and they have a great reward system where these guns are so fun and fantastical, you want to see the next one. And so how do you see the next one? Well, you see the next one by gathering overcharge. How do you get overcharge? By killing enemies. So it makes it worth your time to actually fight guys in the open world, which is something that I think most big open world games struggle with. Why would you fight enemies in an open world game unless there's a reason? You know, do you want to get bogged down in thug battles? No, not really. But what if that helps you unlock a super new gun? Or what if it helps you unlock a crazy new ability? Something like Batman could take a nice cue from this, even Watch Dogs or Grand Theft Auto. But I really like that there's constant character progression. You have a badge system that you can add little perks. You've got amps that just increase your creativity and sort of your control of the battlefield. And the main missions are always enjoyable. Now, I don't think the story in Sunset is one to write home about, nor one that will stick with me, but it's kooky enough to be memorable. There are moments there that I will remember, not for the plot points, but for the set pieces. My absolute favorite, and it's not really a spoiler to say, there's a roller coaster mission where you're on a roller coaster doing battle, grinding along, and I thought that was just, oh, I loved it so much. And others as well. There's some very unique characters that I don't think are, again, like really, you know, generation-defining characters because of their epic line delivery, but they are, you do notice them, and they're remarkable in the way that they're weird and kind of just wouldn't be in a normal game. So you have these sort of Day of the Dead cheerleaders, and you have these LARPers who are intent on saving their king, and a lot of just interesting gangs of people that populate this world and make it just fleshed out in a full way. I love just moving around Sunset City. I think it does open world better than any other game this year, and I think the side missions are excellent. I want to do them because the mechanics are fun. This is something open world games struggle with immensely, is if you don't have fun mechanics, if you're an experience-driven game, and by that I mean what's enjoyable about your title is that you get to feel like you're a crazy badass in GTA, or you get to feel like you're a detective in Watch Dogs. That's the fun part. A lot of times those games struggle when it comes to actually shooting guys, or mission design, or movement, parkouring, whatnot. I mean, I'm super excited to see how Mirror's Edge 2 handles these exact concepts, but Sunset definitely nails it. And it's extra awesome because this one seemed like it was just going straight for the gutter. I played it at E3. I thought it demoed horribly. People seem to be up and down on it. Would it really pan out? And I think it's, to me, it's my favorite Insomniac game. You know, kudos to them for taking a chance and going from something like Fuse, which was a huge flop, and that one started out more creative and crazy, and then they turned it to a hardcore shooter, and it sucked. And then they completely rebound with a spectacular game that right now is real close to the top of my list, and I think it's one of the few must-plays on Next Gen from this year. We'll bounce it all the way back to a totally different game, which is Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare. But what this shares with Sunset is that it surprised the heck out of me. Plants vs. Zombies shooter, does that really mix? You don't think about it, at least before we did. It's a iOS game, a little strategy, side-scrolling puzzler, but shooter, class-based shooter? I don't know. Instead, it turned out to be one of my most played games of 2014 and probably my biggest series ever on my channel. I think I popped out close to 100 episodes of that one, and I still plan on playing more. Sure, I've sort of lost a little bit of interest on it like I do with most games, but man, that Garden Warfare is just great. The way that they sort of compile all the classes, and then the way that they handled the whole microtransaction was beautiful. You know, huge kudos to PopCap and EA for knocking that one out of the park. So the game comes in at a cheap price, $40, and they allow you to buy coins to buy new characters, to buy new aesthetic, cosmetic changes and hats and gear and stuff, but nothing really throws the game out of balance because you can unlock everything through play and it's not too ridiculous. Sure, it does, take a lot longer, but they've done a nice job of adding some real smart things in there to help you in your quest. They've had, weekends where there's challenges and you can get free packs. They dump out free packs just for the fun of it. They've done special holiday-themed events, and all the DLC is free. So when a new map, a new mode, a new set of characters come out, bingo, bango, bongo, you've got it. For $40, you are not required to spend anything, and you get the lifelong supply of whatever they do with Garden Warfare. Like, epic job, in terms of how that's handled with a game that has a baseline cost, but also wants to do some free-to-play stuff, but also wants to do DLC, but also wants to hook players, but also wants to be profitable. I don't know their numbers on how much they made on that, but for how actively they're supporting it, I think it has to be pretty darn good. And you know, hats off to them. I think to me, I feel that that's totally fair. I never feel ripped off, and especially for EA to do it, like, big thumbs up. That's a big step in the right direction for them. But back to the game itself, like, the intermixing of co-op play and sort of the defend the garden mode, which is a lot of fun, and then the multiplayer, which can be competitive in a number of really excellent varieties, whether it's just straight up team deathmatch, or they've introduced some more capture the flag type modes, you know, the kill confirm type mode. Like, they're always putting in, it seems, the smart modes, the smart ideas. Nothing ever really feels like, wow, I wonder why they did that. And the characters are genuinely fun. It's interesting and refreshing to play classes that don't revolve around an assault rifle and a sniper, but instead have a drone that you fly around the map, or, you know, a Gatling gun pea shooter, or a healing sunflower that can plant itself and unleash a super beam, or a zombie on a jackhammer. Like, there's some real just fun stuff in there. I think that's one of the most fun games I've seen released in years. I could talk about it all day and all the little nuances, but you've seen me play it a ton, and just I think that's another must-own. I think it's a must-have. Anybody can get into it, but let me be clear, again, this is not a kid's game. People want to say, oh, Donkey Kong's a kid's game, Mario's a kid's game. No, this is a really hardcore shooter. And maybe a lot of people that play it are kids, but the intricacies, the tactics, the strategy, and the skill required to be successful, those are definitely adult-like in Garden Warfare. And especially if you crank that difficulty up to, like, crazy mode for garden ops, where you're defending the garden with up to 3 other players, like, that's really hard. And I just love how they keep expanding the roster. I love how they keep adding just like the little potable plants. I love how they keep adding new maps, and I hope they continue to do that. It's lovely to see them do Halloween-themed DLC, Thanksgiving. I'm sure they got plans for Christmas as well, so that's a knock out of the park and a definite lock on my Game of the Year list. Where it ends up, I don't know, but definitely a lock. Just to retrace our steps real fast, another thing I think Titanfall struggled immensely with was its progression and unlock system. You know, if you're going to be a multiplayer-only shooter, you really got to nail that progression to keep players coming back for more. And their guns, their perks, they weren't exciting enough. And I thought they had a pretty cool idea with the burn cards, which are sort of these one-use abilities or perks where you could have like a really souped-up machine gun or a longer cloak. But it's kind of a half-baked idea because it ended up making fights very lopsided, where all of a sudden you're dying against an enemy who has a really, really strong LMG, and you didn't know he did, and so he's killing you not because of skill, but because he used a burn card. And so there's got to be a better way to integrate that. I like the idea of, you know, ability-driven unlocks, or whatever you want to call them, cards. The whole system was creative, but I think they're going to have to really revamp that for Titanfall 2, so it feels more fair, and so you're really rewarding skill. It's annoying to see people on the top of the leaderboard who killed 50 of the little microbots, and you got 7 pilot kills, and you're below them, so the scoring system itself might need to be reworked. I don't know. Lots of stuff has to be done before that sequel. But let's touch on a couple other games from the first half of the year. Mario Kart 8, another stellar but expected title. They nail the kart racing formula better than anybody. It's probably the best Mario Kart in the series. Definitely my most played Mario Kart. I adore it to death. It's a game that will probably stay in the rotation for a long time because there's not anything quite like it in terms of the way it plays and also just the all-around pristine quality. It's just... the Luigi Death Stare is the perfect example of why Mario Kart 8 is so awesome, right? Because they just get it. Nintendo puts so much... it's like painterly... just perfection on every little aspect of that game. You've got guys giving weird stares as they drive past. Even turning their heads is a super sweet move. The courses are just amazingly realized. Like, it feels like you're actually in the Mushroom Kingdom. Widening the paths was a great choice, and then adding all this sort of side stuff. There's shops along the road. There's characters cheering you on. It's a great world to be a part of, and it's fun to play the game from a, like, eye candy perspective, even if you are getting, you know, battered with shells in the middle of the pack. It still struggles with the same issues of, like, you know, first place, if they get out ahead and there's no blue shells, it's pretty easy to win. And if you get knocked early with a red shell or a boomerang, you know, in second, third, you drop to 6th, 7th, it can be tricky to come back. It feels like the items really end up dictating the final ranking at the end of the race, but it's so much fun, and the DLC has been great so far. The courses that they added, 8 courses, 3 new characters, 4 vehicles, all for like $8. That's a really good deal. When you're used to getting a couple maps in Call of Duty for $10 or $15, it starts to put in perspective that this is a really nice pricing structure, and it's exciting to see Nintendo dive into DLC, and hopefully they'll continue to do themselves and downloadable content justice with Smash Bros. And Beyond Mario Kart 8. Again, a fantastic game. Doesn't have a story, doesn't have anything memorable. Is it revolutionary? No. But is it really, really dang good? Absolutely. And so you could say it's just another Mario game, but it's the best Mario Kart, and that deserves an applause. If you come out with the best in your series, look how many other series didn't have their best outing in 2014. And so for Mario Kart to do that, like, bravo, kudos to them, and we'll be saying the same thing about Super Smash Bros. In a couple of minutes. A game on last gen, Dark Souls 2. I loved Dark Souls so much. One of the most rewarding video games I've ever played, and I think that came back strong with Dark Souls 2. The reception of DS2 was a little bit weird. Some people thought it was easier. I think some people were just tired of the formula. Some people thought it was, dumbed down too much. Just has a very, I don't want to say evil audience, but a pretty hostile hardcore following. The intense Dark Souls fans are pretty scary, and I learned that the hard way by playing the game and making some mistakes. Another amazing outing, though. I think it's a super fun game. Does it do anything drastically different from the first? No. Is it putting me back in a world with challenging combat and just very intense hands-on gameplay? Yes. Not many other games deliver that. I was hoping Lords of the Fallen would be another, but you can tell that there just isn't the polish and the money behind Lords of the Fallen that Dark Souls has. And just, again, some really great moments. I feel like the early game in Dark Souls 2 was a lot stronger than the late game. The environments and the enemies and the levels definitely impressed me more as I progressed, but the fun of being like low level and being very under-equipped and slow somehow is more appealing than when you're souped up. Like in a lot of games, it's exciting to gain the big powers, and it's really fun to be like fully maxed out. But in Dark Souls 2, I really liked when you started off and you're kind of just first discovering this world. There's sort of a moment of infancy at the beginning where you feel very exposed and very vulnerable, and your hit points aren't that high, and so you can die much more easily. You don't have sort of a shield or a coverage, and I don't mean a literal shield, but when you boost up your stats so much towards the end of the game, you can definitely take some hits, and you can definitely mess around with item combos and things like that to keep yourself alive. Early on, you don't have that luxury, and that is where I love Dark Souls 2 the most. I don't really get into the lore that much. I know some people really dive. I'm, I guess, a little bit more of a baby when it comes to that. I don't want to dig through item descriptions. I'd rather have them give it to me and just sort of force feed me that tale. I think it's an interesting world, and I would like to know more, but I don't have the patience to really read through all of the little like snippets of lore that they've placed hidden within some of the menu screens there. The boss fights, though, brilliant. I thought that the end of the game, without giving spoilers, was pretty lackluster. It sort of comes to a close to me without much of a, the climax was kind of subpar. I thought Dark Souls 1 ended stronger. That battle at the end of that game was so intense and so just glorious, and the way that it was handled, it almost felt like you were facing off against another one of you, like the king was just like a fantastic character, a one-on-one duel to the death. Here, the enemy that you fight, the boss that you face, feels kind of just like another gimmick-driven boss from the game. Nonetheless, like, it's last gen. It doesn't have the graphical chops of some of its competitors for Game of the Year, but it's one that I will definitely consider highly because of how, it's not a perfect game, but I think it's one of the best games, and I still think that Dark Souls, Demon Souls franchise does stuff with video games that other publishers should really take note of. Sure, you can say, oh, they dumbed it down a little bit and made things more straightforward, but it's still one of the most hardcore AAA titles you will find, and I'm so excited for Bloodborne, taking that into HD, making some changes. They definitely are flipping things around for Bloodborne. If you want to think of that as Dark Souls 3, they're reworking things in ways that are brilliant. The weapon combos are just spectacular, because like in one instance you'll be slicing with a sword, and the very next you'll be executing a heavy attack with a humongous hammer, and I'm just really excited to see how far they take that weapon combo system, how many different dual weapons you'll be able to craft. Can you just put together your favorites and make these just magical scythe, gun, hybrid, whatever you want to create. The guns themselves don't seem to break the game. They're just another way for you to parry and keep enemies at bay. So I'm really looking forward to Bloodborne. I hope that they will explore more environments than just sort of the dank, dark, gothic ones we've seen thus far. I know that's the overall theme of the game, but usually they do a pretty good job of adding some visual variety, and I'm excited to see what lands they take us to when that one comes out. It got delayed a little bit, actually almost 2 months, the end of March, but it's still, it's creeping closer. It's coming up soon. And back to Dark Souls 2, like, it still has that incredible accomplishing feeling when you do finally defeat a boss, or you finally take over an area, or you finally execute a perfect run. You know, it's aggravating. You may want to throw your controller a couple times, but the feeling of victory once you do defeat whatever you're going up against, it's rare in games these days. I think Dark Souls 2 this year more than ever really reveals how streamlined things have become in the AAA scene. You don't see games with the intricacy in level design that Dark Souls 2 has. You don't see games with the difficulty that Dark Souls 2 has. You don't see games that overwhelm the player and put them in precarious situations and implement a roguelike system to really make the players struggle. That's not something we see in these massive open world games, which is where the entire industry seems to be trending in the AAA space. Accessibility and fluff, I want to say spectacle really is kind of where things seem to be going, rather than down and dirty polished design. And I still like that Dark Souls 2 retains that. It feels like it may be a game from a time long forgotten, but still with so much just spunk that I enjoyed the heck out of it. And Bloodborne could be a Game of the Year contender for 2015. Dark Souls 2 definitely lays the groundwork for that. I don't know that Dark Souls 2 can reach up to the top of my list, but it's definitely in there. And just like the heavy-shelled turtle enemy is a memorable character, not because he spoke some really funny line, but just because my battles with him, especially early in the game, were so fun and fierce, and like it was just a really a moment right there. You know, that's something captured in my memory bank that I can't unsee. Like, I can picture that turtle perfectly. I know where he's standing in the first area that you encounter him, and I don't know, like, there's just moments like that in Dark Souls 2 that may not be plot-based, but they're sort of your own story-based. Your experience of the game, I feel, is very defined and very just, it's special to you in those games because they are so challenging and because you do have to fight for every victory, which is not something you can say for many of these other games with auto-targeting and pretty easy overall gameplay. We'll hit the big one, which is the September Destiny release. Now, Destiny, again, a heralded company, Bungie, coming out with their big next-gen experience, but this one here really, I feel, was held back by the fact that it's a cross-gen game. Coming out on 360, PS3, as well as the new guys. I think that hurt it. And I think they kind of, I don't know if they lost some key, talent from their teams, or if they just lost focus in the project, or if Activision got its feet too far into their waters, but it feels like it, I don't know, it just feels like it was very corporately driven. It feels like it was checklist based. It feels like it's almost soulless, which is strange from Bungie, whose Halo titles really feel like they have a lot of heart. I wonder though if it does reveal that the Halo games may not have been as good as we thought. They just were very mechanically sound and had a sweet arsenal and a very recognizable head hero in Master Chief. Because Destiny plays phenomenally. I love playing Destiny. I've told people before, I think it is the worst, best game I've ever played because it does so much wrong, and yet it's so fun to play. It's this strange paradox of excellent mechanics, great shooting, fluid movement, fun encounters, and yet boring level design, terrible story, lame planets, and just overall letdown. It seems like at every corner Destiny is going to get better, and it never does. The end boss in Destiny is possibly the most ridiculous, dumb end of a game I've ever seen. It is a pathetic fight against statues that don't even really stand out. And I know that's not where the story technically ends, because you're supposed to go on and play to level 30 and do the raids, but what game forces you to play for so many hours to even access what is potentially the best part of that game? I don't know that I'll ever see the raids because I don't have the time or the desire or the patience to grind my way up into those upper levels. It just seems silly, especially with a character progression system that seems to stop midway through the campaign. I wish you would unlock more skills. If Destiny wants to be an MMO, why is it an MMO with one skill? If each of the classes had much more to unlock, if they had more abilities, if you found yourself creating a unique loadout that put you very separate from your friends, and the armors were I think, a little bit more interesting. Maybe it's a game I could push through because it's so fun. Like, I would enjoy playing, but there's so few missions. The strikes, man, those strikes. The bosses, I think, are so boring and rote. It's a lot of just holding the right trigger. And sure, it's fun to fight guys. Like, when you go into a room, even if you're just bum rushed by like 30 Vex or whatever, like, that's enjoyable. But the bosses are huge bullet sponges, and that's all they are. And where it gets incredibly obnoxiously annoying for me is the way the loot system is. Yes, it's a disaster. Like, the fact that you can do so much better than your teammates and end up with nothing, and they could get a rare item, makes no sense to me. It should be totally driven based on performance. Otherwise, what's the point of me doing well? Why would I not just turn my head and listen to a podcast and die endlessly, and perhaps I'd get the exotic? Like, that makes no sense to me. There are so many overlapping systems of currency. It's just a convoluted mess. And I know a lot of people got into it really hardcore, but I would like to almost interview them and see why they're obsessed with the game. It's almost like they want to be obsessed with the game, and therefore they are. And again, I'm sure some people love it, truthfully, and that's great. It just feels like such a blunder, because there is a foundation that is so fun, and yet everything on top of it just feels incredibly subpar. I wander through some of those early planets, and I'm so excited to get to the moon, to Mars, to Venus, and then you get there and you realize it's nothing more than a palette swap. The most interesting scenery is off in the distance, inaccessible to any player. And the only real difference of these moons and planets and whatnot is the color, and whether they have like ivy on the building or dust. There's no gravity change, nothing really performs differently, and you end up having enemies be on different planets as well. So I don't know, like, the enemies themselves are mere skin changes for the most part. You don't really have to implement that significantly different of a strategy. And to round things out, the experience of having other players be in your game when you don't want them to be is disastrous as well. Like, I had an instance where I was going to fight a mini-boss. 2 guys over level 20 came up to me in my lovely level 15, 16 mission and just murdered the boss before I could even deal damage. I had to sit there and wait for them to clear out, and then I ran into them later, and it ended up being the same thing, where they're just taking guys out for me and totally removing me from the equation. I could just be a passerby watching them win the mission, and I would still get credit for it, and to me that's incredibly goofy. So Destiny was just a flop for me. I really enjoyed it. Like, I still think it's a good game. For all my harsh words, all my complaints, like, I still think it's a good game. I still think it's fun. If you really love it, I don't blame you. I really enjoyed playing Destiny. I just wish it was so much more than it ends up being, and I wonder where it went wrong. If it was at the Activision level, the Bungie level, just a lack of ideas level. Some of the things just seem so strange. And I wonder how much cross-gen held them back. I wonder how much the server technology held them back. I know a lot of people have gotten into the competitive multiplayer, but I didn't really so much. And so that one, gosh, it feels like it has to be on my Game of the Year list because of how much hype that thing had. It was like, you know, the game that everyone talked about all year. And now I feel like it's fizzled out into a very fine group of hardcore players that I feel I will never catch up to. The gap between me and them is so huge that I'm lost. And I'm looking forward to the DLC just because it's more missions, but there's only a couple story missions. It's again geared towards players who have finished everything. And so me paying for a content pack that I can't even utilize half of feels silly. I'll probably end up doing it because I want to play more Destiny. I love this shooting so much, and we are desperate for really good shooters this year. I'm just disappointed by how things were handled and how that game ended up turning out. I don't think it's worth its $500 million price tag or whatever. Is it worth picking up and playing? Probably. You definitely can get a lot out of it. I don't think it's a must-play, though. And that brings us to the fall season. And there's a lot of games that I still need to get through there. Currently incompletes on my list. Stuff like Assassin's Creed Unity, stuff like Far Cry 4, Dragon Age Inquisition, Captain Toad comes out in a week or so. But my early impressions of those really have wavered quite a bit. I started off very high on AC Unity. I was so excited for it. And then all of its technical problems and just the mess of its launch really put me down. And then you hear people talking about how much the game lacks and how the real-world, quote-unquote, story, which I really have enjoyed in past Assassin's Creed, especially 2, which is my favorite, is basically non-existent in Unity. I was pretty bummed and low on the game, and I didn't view it very highly. But after playing more of it and getting into the co-op, like, it still has that tried-and-true AC experience, and it is more fluid. I still can't believe there's some of the errors in there, like how they can't get over the bumping into things that still plagues your movement throughout the world. Boggles my mind, but it is more fluid, and I think the main missions are pretty fun. The story isn't anything, again, to really remember thus far, but midway through I am enjoying it. It seems like one of the shorter Assassin's Creeds, and I'm curious to find out how I feel at the end of that. I have enjoyed co-op a lot. It's kind of a goofy but still very fun romp through that world, and the character customization stuff is a cool addition. So I don't know, TBD on AC Unity. Far Cry 4 is another one that I started off super low on, but the more I play, the more I've liked. My big complaint and issue with Far Cry 4 is that it feels so similar to Far Cry 3, and I don't know how much I should knock the game for that. At first, I wanted to knock it far away from me. I did not like the fact that it was just basically a reskin. But if the game works really well, placing it in a new country, new animals, new enemies, some new missions, maybe that's not too much of a bad thing. We think of the Mario comparison, like 3D Mario is kind of the same mechanics in a different world, and I feel like there's more changes from like Galaxy to 3D World or Sunshine to 64 than there are in Far Cry 3 to 4, but I'm still kind of trying to approach it from that angle, and the more I do that, the more I enjoy the game, and I'm excited to finish that one and see how I feel. I think Far Cry 4 probably could climb higher than Assassin's Creed Unity on my list, but we'll have to see. I have really had not much time at all with Dragon Age Inquisition. It's a monster of a game, like clocking in at 70, 80 hours. I don't know that I'll be able to finish that this year, but I definitely want to spend some time to see how I feel. It's interesting that for my life now, like a massive game like that, it's daunting. Like to know that I have to spend 70 hours to clear that thing, that's scary, and it makes me not want to play it. And when I was younger, I would have just been eating that up. I loved RPGs. I loved Mass Effect so much, but something about such a long video game turns me off in my current, daily life. I don't knock the game for that at all. Just for me, I don't know when or how I would get through that, but I definitely going to play some. And then two games I have played a lot of are Advanced Warfare and Super Smash Bros. For Wii U. We'll start with Super Smash Bros. It is Smash Brothers, but I think it's refined to a T, and I think it's the best Smash Brothers, and they very nearly perfected the formula of their sort of more arcadey, multiplayer, big battle fighter. It really gets big with 8 players, but it fits its prime spot with 4, and I think it even plays maybe even better with 2. I love the new characters, I love the stages, the presentation. I don't know, it just feels like such a, in Christmas, some people wrap presents, and you get a sense that they're like a god or something, because they fold the edges really, really well, and the creases are perfect, and it has this pristine sense, and when you open it up, I don't know, somehow it's just that much more satisfying to open up. Well, to me, that is the menus and just the overall structure of Super Smash Brothers. It feels just, I don't know, it's the cream of the crop in terms of menu design and just aesthetics. It doesn't feel clunky. The load times are almost too quick for their own good. You miss a lot of those little tips because it just loads too fast, but it's fantastic to get in and out of a bunch of fights. There's challenges, there's co-op challenges, there's games, there's classic mode, there's just straight up battles, there's online, there's team battles, there's 8-player Smash, there's stages specifically for that, unlocks and trophies and items and special modes, and you can get real silly with giant metal, high gravity, funny battles. It's really a blast, and yet again, it doesn't strike me as a game of the year because it doesn't have a memorable moment. And perhaps this year I'm going to have to rework my criteria, because we've gone through most of the big ones, and none of them really stand out like a BioShock, like a Last of Us, like a Half-Life 2, like a Portal, or a Portal 2. They don't have personality that really... I don't find them remarkable in that sense. Smash Bros. Is a super good game from a mechanical standpoint, and maybe that is going to have to be enough this year. I don't take away from Smash Bros. I would probably review that game at like a 9.5 out of 10. It's absolutely excellent in every way. It is a must-have on Wii U, just like Mario 3D World, just like Mario Kart. That trifecta of games, I don't know that you can find a better trifecta of games. It's a brilliantly made... It feels effortless. It feels like they just knew exactly what they were doing, exactly what they wanted to create, and I love it. I don't, the game speaks for itself. There's not a whole lot to talk about. It's just like play Smash Brothers. You're gonna have a great time with friends, alone, online, whatever you do. Like, it's freaking fun, and everybody that I've played with seems to echo those same sentiments. It's the best Smash Brothers they've played. It feels like the most complete package, and I wonder where Nintendo goes from here. Obviously, it'll be years until another one even begins its announcement or whatnot, but this was a culmination of an entire year of weekly Sakurai posts, and even though Ridley didn't make it in, I think it's a standout. Advanced Warfare, on the other hand, had a lot more at stake. Call of Duty was in a down year, Ghost was pretty bad, and pre-orders were way low compared to previous installments. But yet Advanced Warfare, I feel, rose above the competition and somehow garnered more praise than Titanfall, which I think is so odd because in this instance, Call of Duty is late to the party, and they're bringing sort of futuristic exosuit gameplay and fast movement into the multiplayer FPS space, and they do it so well. I will say that I don't like the fact that now you can get killed so easily from pretty much any side. In some of the maps, they've sped up the multiplayer to the point where I feel almost out of control. And I'm not a Call of Duty pro, but I've talked to other people who are pretty darn good at the game, and they kind of feel the same way, that it can get too fast for its own good. It seems like scores are... to get a 30-2 game is so much harder in Advanced Warfare because of the fact that you can be approached from any angle, because people are bouncing all around, and because they can reach you and close the gap so much quicker. Kills seem to come a lot faster, and deaths are almost imminent. I do wish that they would retain the simple kill streak system of just 6 kills is this, 8 kills is this. Instead, you have modifiable kill streaks. You can put all these weird points, this and that. The pick 13 system, I think it's interesting, I think it's enjoyable, but it's just not my favorite. I'd rather it be a little more cut and dry, and so you know, like, hey, I got 10 kills, I get this. I got 12 kills, I get this. I got 6 kills, I get this. Rather than like this point system where half the time I don't even know if I've reached my desired kill streak. I also think it's interesting that you see some people not using the movement, some people not using the exo skill, because they're just so ingrained in playing Call of Duty a certain way that those extra abilities almost feel like fluff. They definitely can enhance your performance quite a bit, but sometimes I'll even forget they're there. And I think it's because it's such a Twitch-based shooter, and there's so much going on. It's very, very good, though. It's very excellent, and the campaign stands out to me above all else as like a shining star for Sledgehammer. They nailed it for the campaign this time. Usually I think Call of Duty campaigns are serviceable and pretty lame. This one was a lot of fun. There's some really cool missions. It has a great pace to it. The storyline you can follow, it makes sense, and it's pretty... The performances from like Kevin Spacey obviously enhance it, but all in all, like, it's a very finely crafted campaign, and they don't really try to pull too many punches. There's not like giant, massive, deaths or earthquakes or bombs to really hammer it home. It's kind of subtly stands out as one of my favorite Call of Duty campaigns of all time. I really wish there were more sniper levels, but there's some cool atmospheric things that I don't remember ever seeing in recent CODs, where you are encountering Detroit after some bad things happen, and it's very moody, and the lighting, and it's dark, and you're going through environments slowly and kind of appreciating the graphics and the visuals. It's very pretty. It's shocked me with how gorgeous Call of Duty Advanced Warfare is. I think the cutscenes are some of the best we've ever seen, and this coming from Call of Duty, which I don't think people expected to be like a visual showpiece, but it really is. And it has a co-op sort of horde wave-based mode that's really fun. I don't find myself coming back to it after quote-unquote beating the first 25 waves, but that was really enjoyable, and I definitely could see myself diving back in as they introduce the zombie DLC, which is coming in 2015. The multiplayer, though, is really fun. I think it puts Call of Duty back on the map, and to me, cements the fact that we're going to get a really good Treyarch Call of Duty next year, and it really cements the fact that Infinity Ward is the weakest cog in that 3-team wheel right there, and maybe they shouldn't even make Call of Duties anymore. It seems like their influence and their ideas just don't work very well anymore. And it does make me wonder, like, when will we break away from the big team military shooter? You got stuff like Battlefield Hardline coming out. They've talked about, I'm sure there's another big mainline Battlefield. You'll have Star Wars Battlefront, Call of Duty again next year. Do we ever get a game that is a really good shooter but focuses on more individual character action? I really would like a game like Dishonored, but a shooter. So imagine a game with gorgeous environments, fighting through jungles, and executing a lot of stealth missions, almost like Splinter Cell, but a shooter-based Splinter Cell in first person with character upgrades, really cool environments, and some awesome acting and a good story. Like, that could be stellar. I think of games like Singularity that really stood out for me as hidden gems on Xbox 360 and PS3, and we haven't really seen many shooters in that vein. Even a game like Bulletstorm took some risks. Sure, it failed in some ways, but that one is memorable to me because of how unique its systems were and the fact that it did different things with shooters. And something we haven't seen so much on next gen is a single-player focused shooter that doesn't involve a big military group or a bunch of teammates or MMO like Destiny, blah, blah, blah. Where are those games? When are they coming? Sign me up. Should I make it? I really think a game like that could be incredibly successful and a lot of fun, a good way to use FPS and merge it with some other genres to create something much more magical. A game that I didn't even touch on is Watch Dogs. Watch Dogs is not terrible, but again, it fell victim to a huge hype cycle and sort of being heralded as the savior of next gen. Remember, it was supposed to be released last year, didn't make launch, was delayed, and kind of released as a middle-of-the-ground video game. I enjoyed it, I think, more than most people, actually. I don't think it was fantastic, but I think it was a lot of fun, and I wish that game was linear. I think if Watch Dogs was done in a Max Payne style, where the detective stuff was amplified, it would be a lot better game. The fact that it's open world, and they put in all these dumb side missions, and they make, you spend a lot of time in your car, to me, sort of diluted the fact that this could have been a pretty cool detective, tech-driven, futuristic game set in Chicago. Like, I liked a lot of the elements. I don't think Aiden was a very well-realized character. He's a little bit too moody and brooding and kind of blah, but definitely there's some cool missions there, and there's some fun stuff, and I even dabbled in the DLC for a little bit, and that was enjoyable, because I think the cover-based system there feels like they borrowed a lot from Splinter Cell, and I probably enjoy it because of that. I just wish that game was linear. I think they could have focused the story better. I think they could have made the missions more fully fleshed out. You wouldn't have to worry about the interactions between the cops and you and this and that and streets and escapes and blah, blah, blah. To me, that's the boring stuff. I didn't really like sort of the emergent gameplay in that one. The things that you could create on your own. I was much more a fan of the main line, and maybe for Watch Dogs 2, they can emphasize that more. Another title to touch on that I nearly forgot is Shadow of Mordor. That one crept up on just about everybody and surprised the heck out of us with its superb nemesis system. This idea that you're fighting orcs and killing leaders and getting killed yourself, and then everyone remembers and you get to watch it unravel on this chessboard of evil is pretty darn awesome, and one of the most next-gen feeling things that I played all year. The system, it's that brilliant moment where they take a gameplay idea and flesh it out using the power of the consoles to create a living, breathing world. So you will stumble upon roaming bosses who remember you, who have something to say to you, and each one sort of participates in your own tale. The game's main storyline is not strong, but the moments you can create are really quite epic. And I feel like it almost retains a little bit of a tech demo-y feel to it because the world is pretty bland, but that's not to say it's not good or even great. The combat is the Batman Arkham style combat, but done in a very visceral, violent, and fluid way. I love some of the more stealth moves with the arrows and the dashes and sort of the elf side of things. It's really, really fun to get in there and find a orc that you want to take down, to track him, to beat him into submission, and then use him against one of his masters and sort of craft your own creepy, crawly, spider, shady path through this kingdom of Urex and orcs and whatever all the Lord of the Rings stuff is going on in there. I think it falters when it comes to putting it all together because the storyline isn't very great, because of the fact that the world itself is a little bit dull, because it can feel repetitive once you've seen some of the exciting points. Like the first time you do one of those captures and intels, or one of those just big kills and someone says something about it later, or you fight someone's brother, or you perfectly match their weaknesses with your strengths and execute them in a quick fashion and get one of the legendary runes, like that's really, really fulfilling and a really beautiful moment, but I don't think it puts all the pieces together. It sort of feels like a puzzle that doesn't quite have its corners on tight enough. And that's where I feel Sunset Overdrive really does excel is that it's a tight package. Like every aspect, the main missions, the traversal, the combat, the upgrades, the side missions, the world itself, the graphics. Sunset Overdrive seems to have possibly the most complete package of the year, and that's why I regard it so highly. Its weakest point is the story, but even that has some comedic gold within that I really enjoyed, and as someone with a pretty difficult sense of humor, I was happy to see that they didn't push the jokes too far in one direction or the other, and I found it to sort of sit in a nice middle ground where it was over the top, it broke the fourth wall, it was silly, there were some lame punchlines, but for the most part, they hit their mark and delivered a humorous experience. Shadow of Mordor obviously is a much darker tone, and that's fine, but I don't feel like they complete the picture of the game in the best way, and that's sort of 2014 in a lot of ways feels like that. Many games that had interesting systems that benefited from the PS4 and Xbox One tech, great graphics, or maybe a beautiful big world, or maybe a really sweet system like the Nemesis system, but we haven't seen really a game that puts it all together and delivers like a 10 out of 10 or a, knock out of the park game of the year home run. We're still waiting on that. I thought Assassin's Creed Unity might be it. We'll touch on that in a little bit, but it definitely doesn't reach the heights that I had hoped. Shadow of Mordor comes pretty close, and I give them huge credit for creating something unique and mechanically next gen. It will definitely rank up there, but will it reach the top? Probably not. And I think that about wraps up most of the games. The indie scene did not really take hold for me this year, which is strange. Downloadable games have gotten weird as of late because now so much is digital. I remember back in the early 360 days with stuff like Braid, Limbo, Shadow Complex, I looked so forward to the weekly downloadable XBLA game. It's not the case anymore because every week you have games. Steam is overcrowded with so much stuff, and I'm downloading full games. So the download space has sort of lost its identity. There still were some very good ones, stuff like Towerfall, The Binding of Isaac Rebirth, some really good games, and a lot more that I want to dive into. People were mentioning indie games to me on Twitter, and I'm excited to check out more of those, because this was kind of a year where I fell off the indie scene. I kind of found myself disillusioned with the fact that there were so many indie games, and rather than a few really awesome, standout experiences, I found myself just drowning in a sea of clones, and there were so many games doing this, so many games with this art style, so many games trying to set this tone, so many games doing Amnesia style horror, so many games doing Limbo style art, so many games on iOS, so many games on Steam, and you're just running headfirst into like a sea of games, and it's very hard to pick out the best, and it's very hard to find the ones that you love, and it's very hard to appreciate them in the same way when there's so many lookalikes. When Limbo came out, nothing else was like that, and so it was exceptional. And then you have a bunch of games that look a certain way, or a bunch of games that take on a specific mechanic, and I found myself bored and sort of just, I didn't want to dive into that space. They have to find a way to highlight these special ones better and bring forth the real gems and help raise them above the rest of the crop. There was still some standout stuff, some fun stuff I played, like I mentioned, and I'm excited to dive in more before I finalize Game of the Year, but there's no real indie game that rings the bell for me as like, oh my god, this has to go on there, yet. I'll also mention Walking Dead Season 2, which I thought was awesome. I love that one a lot. We don't need to go into detail. It's basically, it would be an entire story spoiler, but I thought the way that thing wrapped up was really awesome. I still don't like a lot of things Telltale does. I think it's embarrassing that those games run as poorly as they do still, and now that they're pumping out Tales of the Borderlands, or Tales from Borderlands, whatever, and Game of Thrones back to back, it makes me worried, like, are they just going to start producing the heck out of stuff and not caring, or are we going to get a bunch of similarly styled games with just new skins? Do we want that? Is Walking Dead special because it's Walking Dead, or special because it's a unique game that tells a story? And if we have a bunch of games that tell a story in that same fashion with QuickTime events and limited movement and some, meaningful choices, are we going to be like, I'm kind of burnt out on this style of game, and it will dilute Walking Dead Season 3 whenever that comes out? I don't know. I'm still very invested in Clementine, and even though I feel the ending of Season 2 is pretty... It's amazing in the way that they structured it, and I thought that the climax of that game was just crazy good. But then with the 8 different endings, you realize that ultimately none of them really matter, because there's no way they have 8 different starting points for Season 3, so you're picking things that probably will have no impact on the overall story, rather impacting your Season 2 story. I just wish that they had a way to, it's probably very tough, it's definitely very tough, but to carry over some of your decisions in a more meaningful way, season to season, episode to episode. But I really love the heck out of Walking Dead Season 2. I can't think of anything else right now, and this has been running for a long time. My voice is going dry. I need some water. I still have a couple hours of travel to go, but thanks for spending this time with me. Definitely made things a whole lot more fun and helped me pass the time as I cruise along the country here. Don't even know where I am, somewhere in Pennsylvania, and that is where I'll leave you. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed, definitely smash that like button. I do appreciate it. I'm planning on launching a full-on podcast in January. I need to get that all set up, but that's something I'm committed to and want to do for 2015, so look forward to that. I've really enjoyed the solo podcast and the group podcast I've done, and I'm hoping to bring a lot more of that your way next year. But thanks for listening to this solo one. Let me know your game of the year currently in the comments below. What games are ranking up there for you, which ones you're enjoying the most. I'm curious to see what kind of discussion you all have. Sorry if the quality was a little bit shaky. I am on my iPhone, I am in my car, but hey, we still had a good time, and hopefully you guys still enjoyed the video. Until next time, everybody, thanks again, drink so much salt, have a fantastic day, and we'll see you all later.